Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot daf ayin. I would say after all these dafim of kind of out there things, we're going to get back in the beginning of the next chapter to a very basic Gemara structure of, where do we learn this from? Here's a drasha. What about this? What do you do with those words? And one of those kind of much more standard type of Gemara page, which I know we're not so used to anymore. Okay, we're going to start with a bit of a review of yesterday's daf, and I have a chart that's going to help us to go through. I'm going to actually share screen, and my computer is giving me some issues here. Okay, what's going wrong with my computer? Okay, maybe I won't share screen today. Okay, let's try one more time. No, it's not showing up. Okay. So we'll manage without it, but you can follow along in the screen and we will go from there. Although maybe I'll just try one last attempt to do this. Okay. In the meantime, I'll try while I'm doing it to go through. We started with this interesting machloket about an arusa habal arusa bebeit chamiv. Right? I say interesting because it was a little bit surprising what we saw in the opinion of Rav's opinion, that basically a person, they're engaged, a couple is engaged, and we end up having this issue that she gets pregnant. And now the question is, what's the status of the child? So we have this question. Rav says the Vlad is a mamzer, and Shmuel said the Vlad is a shtuki, right? Which we're not sure the status of his father. So now we have this big question about why Rav says this, and in what case exactly are we referring to? So it's not working. Okay, fine. I won't share screen today. It's not working, but everyone can try to open the sheet as you see on the site. Okay. Rava says, "Mistaber milti derive the damya me alma." Okay, this is a review from what we saw yesterday. That Rav makes sense when we're talking about where she's suspected, right? If she only if there's only rumors that she was with him, then even Rav, and of course Shmuel, is going to agree that we follow the father because obviously he's the only one. How does Rava know this? Because of our Mishna. Remember the Mishna, there was a single man and a single woman. He was a kohen. She was not. She can't eat truma because of some encounter that happened between the two of them. However, if she ends up getting pregnant from it, then because she has a son with the kohen, she gets to eat. So now they said, well, in a case where she was actually by Torah law permitted to the guy she was engaged to, even though the rabbi said you can't have relations then, but since by Torah law she was permitted in that case, whereas in the other case they were forbidden to each other for sure, and yet we're going to go by the kohen. So of course in our case, where she's permitted to her fiancé, of course we're going to say it right. We're going to go by the father. So even Rav will agree to that. It's only in the case what we're arguing about is in a case where she's suspected of being both with him and with other people, right? So that's what he says, right? But lo daimim alma, right? Mistaber milti derive of a lo, right? That therefore, only when she's suspected of being with other people and there's rumors about it, that's what we're going to say the Vlad is a mamzer. Comes Abaye and he says, I don't know what you're talking about. Even if she's suspected of having been with, right? Even though we have rumors that she's been with him, as long as we have rumors that she's been with other people as well, we're going to make her, I'm sorry, wait, no, I got confused. Right. Even if the only rumors are about her with him, and that's what Rav said. Rav said for sure Rav would agree it's no problem. He says, no way, no how. Once she's mafkira nafsha, she basically says, I don't care. I'm going to sleep with my fiancé. We can assume that she's going to sleep with other people as well. We basically assume this woman is a no good, right? And we're going to call the kid a mamzer, even though maybe, you might think it's more of a chance. It's kind of likely just because a woman sleeps with her fiance. Doesn't mean she's sleeping around with other people. And there's no rumor to say that. Abaye thinks the Vlad's a mamzer, according to Rava, according to Shmuel, is shtuki. The second version is, and what does he do with the Mishna? Remember why the Mishna then? Do we assume the father's a kohen when she gets pregnant? That's when they were both in a jail, a prison, just the two of them, nobody else. Again, it's a bit far-fetched to say that's the Mishna. This next option is going to actually work better according to Abaye. We'll see. Abaye is going to make a lot more sense in the second version. So starting 3 lines from the bottom. Ika da amri. Biba'aleha kule amalu pligi de batre dide shadinale. If he ends up in relations with her, the fiancé, and he admits it, then no one's going to disagree. Clearly, we're going to follow him and assume he's the father. The hachi itma, and this is really what they were fighting about, arguing about. Arusa she'ibra. We don't know, right? We started with saying the machloket is ba arusato ala bebeit chamiv, right? He slept with her in her family's house, right? His father-in-law's house. Because remember, that's where she lives during the engagement time. So that's why it happened there. I don't think it really matters where it happened, although maybe it does. But here we're just saying a case where she was engaged and all of a sudden she shows up pregnant. We have no idea what happened. Okay, we don't know who she was with. That's where they have a machloket. Rava amar mamzer Shmuel amar shtuki. Now comes in Rava and says, Mistabra milte derive lo daima mine v'daima me'alma. He comes and says, wait a minute. It's only if there's rumors that she's been with other people, but there's no rumors that she's been with him. Then, right, the rumor is she's just sleeping around with other people. Aval, daima mine, and this is actually Rav here. Rava makes less sense here. Rava made more sense in the first one. The second one, I think that Abaye makes a lot more sense. He says, if there's rumors, it all depends on the rumors, right? Depends, right, in each opinion based on what rumors and how we treat them. According to this, if there's rumors, daima mine, that she was sleeping with him, we don't care if in addition there's rumors that she was sleeping around with other people. Because she engaged him, there's more of a likelihood it's from him, even though there's all sorts of rumors spreading about all different people. Okay? That's a little bit more radical because you would think, at least we have to worry suffix mamzer, right? Maybe not vaday mamzer, but you would think, at least you could see an opinion there that maybe the kid would be a mamzer if there's all these different rumors. But Rava thinks no. Since she's engaged him, that's enough of, I guess, a chazaka or something to make it that likely it's his. And now what's his proof? His proof is our case, right? In the Mishna, right? She gets to eat. She was single. He was single. She ended up with him, right? And they had a child. So now again, hey chidami, what's the case here? Were there rumors? Were there not rumors? With her, with him, with other people? If it's that there were rumors that she was with him and not with anybody else, well then, why would the Mishnah even need to tell us that she gets to eat truma? Obviously, she's got a kid with the kohen. Nobody thinks the kid belongs to anybody else. It would be a totally obvious halacha, and therefore, that would prove that, right? Therefore, it can't be that that's the case. Right? So that's where Rava gets it, that there's no way we're talking about where there were rumors only with him, not with anybody else, because you wouldn't even need the Mishnah to tell you that. Therefore, it must be that she was also suspected of having slept with other men. And yet, in other words, the whole point is, what's the unique halacha in this Mishnah? The unique halacha in our Mishnah is, even though this woman was suspected of sleeping around with other people, right? The kohen claims it's my child, but there's suspicions about, all around about her sleeping with other people. Therefore, comes the Mishnah to teach you, even though there's rumors of her being with other people, we can even allow her to eat truma. Okay, it's a big chiddush to say that, right? It's really it's unique because there's definitely, right? You would always think with truma we're going to be more strict, and here we're dafka we say no. That's according to Rav. And then he says, again, same logic as before. Once the Mishnah allows that case, of course, and assumes he's the father, of course, in our case, we're going to assume he's the father because here they're already engaged, right? So again, we're going to have the same wording. There, they're both forbidden to each other, right? He's forbidden and the rest of the world is forbidden to her. And yet, we still go by him. Right here, and everyone else is forbidden to her, but he's theoretically, by Torah law, permitted to her, all the more so. So Amar le Abaye says, what are you talking about? Says, no way, no how. If there are rumors going around that she is with other men, of course the vlad's going to be a mamzer. I don't care that she's engaged him. It doesn't make a difference. How does he deal with the Mishnah? What are you talking about? The case in the Mishnah, there were no rumors at all. It was just we had a woman pregnant. She and the father claim, the kohen claims it's their child. Nobody heard any rumors of her sleeping with anybody. And that's why we go by the kohen. But as soon as there's rumors, we're definitely going to say the vlad's a mamzer, or at least a shtuki. Okay, so I see questions asking in the chat about how seriously do we take rumors? And I think what this sugya is getting at is exactly that question. How seriously do we take these rumors that we've heard about? Or suspicion, right? It could be suspicion, rumors, however you call it. But how seriously do we take this? That's really the question. In other words, do we take rumors seriously? Do we not, right? Rava, certainly in the second Lashon, seems to say we don't really take these suspicions very seriously. We go by what facts we have on the ground. She's engaged to him, and and that seems to be enough to go by that the child is his. So it's very interesting, right? I think it's exactly the debate between both Rav and Abaye, and according to the first reading and the second reading is how much are we going to take into account suspicions that we hear on the street, because no one really knows how to treat them. Do we take them seriously? Do we not take them seriously? So anyway, whether you got all the ins and outs, right? It's a little bit complicated. What each one says in each one. But again, I think if you think about, at least to me, Rava in the first version seemed to make a lot of sense, and Abaye in the second version seemed to make a lot of sense. But again, you could choose otherwise, right? There's all different possibilities here as to what you might think seems the most logical. Now we're getting to all those grandchild cases in the Mishna. And the question is, what's the source for them? So we had the Eved who's posel mishum bi'ah, okay, which he can disqualify his lineage through bi'ah. Okay, we're not going to get, that wasn't really the main case of the Mishnah. But the main thing was, eino posel mishum zera. That means his children don't disqualify women from eating truma. How so? Remember, we had the case where a woman was married to let me try to remember. I guess it goes in both ways. But a woman is married to a kohen, let's say. She's a bat Yisrael. She's eating truma. Then she has a son. Her son ends up in a relationship with a maidservant. They give birth, right, a Canaanite one or a non-Jewish. They give birth to a child. That child is not considered miyuchas to the father, which means that if her husband dies, who's a kohen, her son dies, who would have allowed her to eat truma because she's still connected to the husband's family, the Eved does not factor into this at all, okay? So in that case, right, she would, in other words, Eved no posel really means he's not factored in at all. So in that case, she wouldn't be allowed to eat truma. And in the flip case, if she was a bat kohen and she wanted to go back and eat in her father's house, the Eved wouldn't disqualify her. That's really the case the Mishna was talking about, because it uses the language doesn't disqualify her. He won't disqualify her from going back because normally she'd be still connected to his family through the grandchild. No, he has no bearing on that. So where do we get this all from? My taima, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "Ha'isha v'yeladea tiyeh la'adoneha." Okay, v'gomer. It doesn't redo the whole pasuk. This is in a case when Eved Ivri, when he's a Jewish slave and he's living in his master's house. Right, he works for 6 years. If he wants to stay longer, he gets his ear pierced. He could stay forever till the Yovel year, which was in the Parsha, Bahar, which is maybe coming up or was already last week, depending on where you live. But all about Yovel, and they go back. But they're in Eved, it's called the olam, even though it's not forever. Anyway, when a normal 6-year slave, what does he do? He leaves at the end of the 6 years, and the kids he's allowed to be with the Shivcha Knani while he's there and have children. But the children stay with her. They don't leave with him. Okay. He goes in by himself. He comes out by himself. He doesn't, they're hers. They're not miyuchas elaf. That's where we learn it. So because they're not considered his, therefore they have no bearing on any of these truma laws. Mamzer posel v'ochel. On the flip side, though, if you have a mamzer, a disqualified child, right, because you weren't allowed to be married, you ended up with a mamzer, that grandchild, though, can allow the parent to eat truma. Okay, remember we said the mamzer himself can't eat truma, but in this case, because remember there was the case, it was a woman was married to a kohen. She's a bat Yisrael. She has a daughter who marries a mamzer. The moms, they give birth to a child. Okay, the daughter dies, the husband dies. She's got no other family other than this mamzer child. The mamzer child basically allows her to eat truma from the kohen. Or in the flip case, she's a bat kohen, he prevents her from going back to her father's house because it's considered her children. So now, right, and that connects her to the husband's family. so she can't go back. And right, if he's a kohen, she can stay and eat truma. Tanu Rabbanit, v'zera ema. Now, when does she, remember when she goes back to her family's house? When her husband dies or divorces her, right? That was a whole trasha we had yesterday. And then it's almana and it's garsha. And v'zera ema. She doesn't have any children. So ainli ala zara. That sounds like just children, right? If you would translate that pasuk, you'd say she doesn't have any. I mean, obviously you could translate it in different ways. But the simple reading would be she doesn't have any children. So zera zara minayin. How do we know grandchildren? Talmud lomar v'zera einla mikol makom. There's different ways to darshan this. I'll just go with a simple, which is zera einla. She has no children, right? It's like not any kind of zera anywhere, meaning even grandchildren. So then they say, well, when you say zera, maybe you only mean kosher zera, as opposed to mamzerim. Maybe ainli ala zera kasher, zera pasul minayin. Where are we going to learn zera that's no good, like a mamzer, which you shouldn't have had those children because they weren't allowed to marry in the first place? Talmud lomar v'zera einla ayin ala. They darshan the ain, switch the aleph and the ayin. Ayin, look really well, meaning find even other zera that you wouldn't have necessarily expected. And then if you have that kind of child, you can't go back home and eat in your father's home, the truma, if you're a bak kohen. There we learn even a mamzer. So now they say, wait a minute, you just broke one of the golden rules of drashot. Ha'afite lezera zara. You already used that verse. You zera einla, you already said came to include grandchildren. How could it include grandchildren and also disqualify grandchildren or disqualified, right? I guess disqualified children would be more difficult, but grandchildren, it could happen. So they say, zera zara lo itzrich. Really, you don't need grandchildren from a verse. Why not? Well, go back to our sugya about having children, prurevu. Remember what we said, b'nei banim harein kibanim, grandchildren count like children. So just like they count for like children for prurevu, they also count like children for this, okay? So therefore, you don't really need a pasuk for it, and therefore, ki itzrich krat lezera pasul. So zera einla doesn't really need to teach your grandchildren. Yes, they said, but it's not really needed for that. Therefore, it's used for this other drasha of the zera pasul, which is the mamzer. Now, if you remember, the Mishna had explained the case of the mamzer. It was a case, for example, of, right, remember, it gave all sorts of examples. It says you end up, your daughter marries an eved or an ovei kochavim, and they have a child, which is a mamzer. Remember, when we read the Mishna, we said the Gemara is going to go into who holds this, because not everybody holds this. So, Amalei Rishakish, the Rabbi Yochanan Kiman, who is this Mishna according to? Ki Rabbi Akiva, Damar, Yesh Mamzer, B'chai Ve'lavim. This Mishna must only hold like Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva says, any Chai Ve'lavim, the kid is a mamzer. And remember that unique opinion we already said when we said the first time, luckily we don't hold like this because we'd have a lot more mamzerim around. He thinks, right, other people think karet or mito beitin, right, like you sleep with your father or something serious like that, child will be a mamzer. But when it comes to chai ve'lavim, no, right? And Evid and Ovei Kochavim is just a chai ve'lav, like Yevamot mamzer b'kal Hashem, that's a negative commandment. There's no karet involved, there's no mita beitin. So Rabbi Akiva, though, holds even chai ve'lavim, so this would have to match his opinion. Comes Rabbi Yochanan, he says, no. Afilu tema, Rabbanan, ba'ovei kochavim ve'eved mod. Okay, he says, even the rabbis agreed that even though regular chai ve'lavim, it wouldn't be the case, like let's say, a ger amoni or something, the kid won't be a mamzer, but it would be if it's an eved or ovei kochavim. Because Rav Dimi said the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that this is the case. So this is a big famous machloket. So I told you before, we don't hold this way. But Rabbi Yochanan thinks that even though the rabbis think it's chayve kritud, or, there's also the opinion mito beitin, but mostly chayve kritud is the main opinion. When it comes to Eved Ovei Kochavim, they make an exception according to Rabbi Yochanan, and they agree that the Vlad's a mamzer. Rish Lakish, obviously from our sugya, you see, disagrees with this. And there's a machloket about what we hold, right? So in the end, we don't hold that the child is a mamzer. We're ending this chapter with this very ironic kind of case where kohen gadol pamim sheposel. Okay, so in yesterday's stuff, we saw the Mishnah where basically the Mishnah had said, you could have a case where your grandson is a kohen gadol. You were married, you're a bak kohen, you're married to a Yisrael. Then your daughter marries a kohen. She gets to eat truma, right? And in the event that she dies and your husband dies and you no longer have any children or husband connected to the Kohen's family, but you have this grandson who is a Kohen gadol, he connects you back to your husband's family because you have this grandson. And he's not necessarily a Kohen gadol, but he theoretically could be a Kohen gadol, and yet he can mess you up from truma. Okay, and then the woman in our Mishna said, I translated exactly right yesterday, but she basically says, I don't wish this upon you that you have children who are kohanim gedolim because of look what he did to me. Okay, so it's this woman who kind of gets upset that on the one hand you would think you'd be happy to have a kohen gadol child, but not really, right? Or a grandson. So now we have a similar braita about this, but a little bit different than our Mishnah. Kohen gadol pamim sheposel. That's a quote from the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan. Hareini kaparat ben biti kuza shemachilenu b'truma ve'eni kaparat ben biti kada sheposlani min hatrum. Okay, literally this means, right? I'm happy to, like we always say, kapara alai, right? I'm happy to have something go wrong for me, and that will atone for my little utensil that's not really so important that actually helps me to eat truma. Okay, and this is kind of like, let's say you have a mamzer. Now, not like our case, okay? You would have, this wouldn't be, by the way, the same woman. It would have to be someone else. What she's saying is, I can imagine a woman who has a mamzer child, let's say, okay, she's a Yisrael, married to a kohen. Her daughter marries a mamzer. They have a mamzer child. That mamzer child will enable her to eat truma. So what she's saying is, I can think of a case, not with her, because her would be the opposite. We need to find a case where she's connected to the husband's family and it messes her up. The mamzer, he connecting them helps her. Okay, so that's why it can't be the same woman. It would be because each one is in a case where one's about Yisrael married to a kohen and one's about kohen married to a Yisrael. But she's basically saying, I could conceive of a case where there's this lowly creature who's a mamzer, in her mind, right? Mamzer is lowly creature. Obviously, if you met mamzerim, right, they're not lowly creatures at all. But, in the discussion that we're having, right, they're a lower status than kohanim, and they can actually be helpful to me. Whereas this kohen gadol, I am not willing to be kapara for him because, even though he's a kada, he's a very beautiful jug, but he's poslani min truma. He can mess me up for truma. And I think, and it's very interesting, we end the chapter with this hadran alach almana. It almost sounds like after we've established all these lists of status and who's in what status and who can marry a kohen and who can, and what kind of relationship is going to disqualify you for truma, for kohen, for all this. In the end, what it comes down to is status is unimportant, right? Because you could have someone of lowly status who looks, not the part and could actually be helpful to you. And you could have someone of high status who could actually mess you up. It's actually, I almost think that there's something to be said here that they specifically call it a kohen gadol. Because if you remember, at the end of Bayit Sheni, the kohanim gadolim were very corrupt. And I think it's almost interesting here that specifically they're using the language of kohen gadol as a reference to politically what was going on and how they were abusing their power. And again, this statement, like a moral statement about don't judge a book by its cover. Okay, that's really what it's saying. And with that, we will start the next chapter. And similarly, we're going to be talking about this issue of truma and who can eat truma and what disqualifies. Someone who's uncircumcised or impure. Okay, these could be temporary, could be permanent, because someone could be not circumcised because his brother died in circumcision. And then remember, we have a chazaka that they die in circumcision. We don't circumcise them. But if you have someone who's an arel, who's an uncircumcised male Jewish person, or kolatz me'im, or anyone who's impure, okay, because whenever you're impure, you can't eat truma. Nishehem va'avdehem yochlu b'truma. Here you have something interesting. The opposite, right? Where he can't eat truma himself, but he can allow others to eat. The people in his house can eat because the issue is with him specifically and not with them. Get much more into detail into these cases. Okay, crushed testicles or a severed organ of the man. Now, there's nothing wrong with them in terms of kahuna, in terms of being able to eat truma. They're not disqualified from eating truma. Okay, even though maybe they're balei mum. Okay, this is someone who got an injury we're talking about, but they can eat truma. But nishehem lo yachlu, what's the problem with them? They're not allowed to marry someone, a regular Israelite woman. So because of that, if they marry someone, a regular Israelite woman that they're not allowed to marry, they can't enable them to eat truma because it's a disqualified marriage. But notice they can, right? It's again, a little bit ironic. Their slaves could eat truma. I mean, it makes perfect sense because the nisuin, the marriage was never supposed to happen. But their slaves can eat, but not their wives. If, though, they got married, everything was fine, and then he got injured, and then from then on, he doesn't engage in relations with her anymore, that's the im lo yida'a, then they can continue to eat truma. What is the case of p'tsuah daka? Okay, his testicles get injured in some way. We'll see in the Gemara all different options of what kind of injury. We're going to get a little bit graphic. That's in a bunch of dapim. And afilu achat mehem, even one of them, that's enough to disqualify him. Ukut shuvcha kol shenichat agid. Ve'im nishtayar me'atara afilu kechut hasara kasher. Now they're getting into what part of his organ. So they say if it's at the tip, then as long as you have a little bit like a hair's, what do you call it? Like the thinness of a hair, as long as a little bit of the tip, the width of that is left, then that's fine. But if you have less than that, then no. But the tip is not the important part. It's the main part of it. Okay. Like I said, we'll get a little bit more graphic about this later, but a little bit of the less pleasant Gemaras to delve into. Okay. We have a few dapim till we get there. Tanya. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Eliezer, the Masorah Shas changes it to Rabbi Eliezer. We're now going to have a big braita to basically try to prove minayin la'arel she'ein ochel b'truma. This is our main topic for the rest of class. How do we know that an arel can't eat truma? There's a big chart on today's sheet, which unfortunately I couldn't figure out. There's a problem with my share screen today, but you should follow the chart. Part of the chart is tomorrow's daf because we're going to have two sources. And if you look at the chart, you'll see some of the questions and even the answers are identical in both parts. So tomorrow's daf will be a little bit easy. It'll be a review of parts of the things we did in today's daf because each one learns it from somewhere else, but some of the questions asked are similar, okay, or identical. So Rabbi Eliezer says, how do we know he doesn't eat truma? Ne'emar toshav sachir b'Pesach, v'ne'emar toshav sachir b'truma. Okay, I brought you the psukim so you can see them. So if you look in Shemot Yubet, psukim 43 to 40 or to 45, and then pasuk 48, it says, these are the laws of Pesach. I'm reading all these psukim because we're going to darshan each of them as we go on. Anyone who's a so ben nechar often means someone who left Judaism, but it also obviously means if you're not Jewish, okay, can't eat it. But if you own a slave, a Canaanite slave, umalta, when you gave him a brit milah, az yochabo, then he can eat also. Toshav sachir lo yochabo. Okay, we're going to have to define what a toshav and a sachir is, right? A resident and some kind of someone who works for you, okay, like a sachir, someone you hire, a hired person, can't eat it. We don't know exactly what this means. And then if you skip to Memchet 48, if someone converts, himolo kol zachar, make sure he converts all males, and then he can do it. He can have do the korban. It'll be like everyone else. That's our pasuk. Okay, anyone who's an arel can't eat the korban Pesach. Now this is Pesach. This has nothing to do with truma. When you go to the truma pasuk, it says in Vayikra chapter 22, pasuk 10, v'chol zar lo yochal kodesh. These are by the pasukim we've been darshaning about the bat kohen and all that. It says first, any stranger can't eat kodesh, which is including truma. Toshav kohen b'sachir lo yochal kodesh. Also, this toshav and sachir, whatever they are, of a kohen doesn't get to eat. So now here we go. Because toshav and sachir, now it doesn't say anything about an arel. Said about an arel, it would be very obvious what the halach is. So now they say, so where do we learn this? What we call gzera shava. We compare the same words appear there and the same words appear there. And since there the arel is forbidden in Pesach, the arel will be forbidden in truma. So, ne'emar toshav sachir b'Pesach, ne'emar toshav sachir b'truma, ma toshav sachir amor b'Pesach arel asur bo, af toshav sachir amor b'truma arel asur bo. That's basically what I just said. Toshav sachir appears in Pesach, toshav sachir appears in truma. Since the arel can't eat Pesach, therefore an uncircumcised person can't eat truma. So Rabbi Akiva Omer Einot Tzarich. We're going to have a lot of questions on that drasha, so we'll get back to that. Rabbi Akiva Omer Einot Tzarich. You don't need that because Arei Omer, it says in another verse, Ish. Okay, this is Kitzarua Ozav. if he's a leper or a zav, he's impure. And then it says he can't eat any kodesh, which we're going to see means truma. So ish, why does it say ish there? To say not only someone who's tamei, but an additional person. Who will that be? An arel. Now, as I said, tomorrow we're going to get to Rabbi Akiva. Today, all Rabbi Eliezer. Amar. So first, we're just going to quote Rabbi Eliezer again. It's just a quote from what we just read. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Nemar toshav sachir b'Pesach and Nemar toshav sachir b'truma. Ma toshav sachir more b'Pesach arel asorbo. Av toshav sachir more b'truma arel asorbo. Okay, that's Gzera Shava. We just said it. I'm not going to repeat it. Now, the Gemara has to prove now that it's mufne. We've had this many times with the Gzera Shava. There's certain rules about Gzera Shavas. First of all, you have to have a tradition about it. Second of all, it has to be a pasuk that's not needed for anything else. It's called mufne. If it's needed for something, then you can still do a Gzera Shava. But if you have a question, meaning something logically doesn't work here, you can knock it out. If the pasuk is unnecessary and the words that you're darshaning, then you can say it doesn't matter if you have any questions. The extra, because they're there and there's no other purpose for them to be there other than for this Gzera Shava, we can assume even if you have a question on the Gzera Shava, logical question, it doesn't matter. The Gzera Shava stands. Later, we're going to see there's an opinion that now Gzera Shava always has two sides. Some people say as long as one of them is mufne, it's okay, and that's what we're going to first prove. Some opinions say both need to be mufne in order for it to work. Then we're going to get back to that. And then we're going to have to prove that both are mufne somehow. So now they're going to say mufne must be fruit. What? Do you love mufne? If it wasn't, you can knock it out. What's your knockout to this? Logical. You're chayav if it's pigul, you have the wrong intent when you're bringing the sacrifice. If it's notar, if you leave it over beyond the given time, and if you sacrifice it while you're impure, those things don't apply to truma. So therefore, you could say Pesach, you have to be circumcised because it has all these stringencies about it, but not for truma. So therefore, it must be mufne. So now we have to prove that it's mufne. So the Gemara says, lie, it really is afniya mufne. You're right, it is mufne. How so? Which one? By truma or by Pesach? Hey, mufne, which one? Truma mitzvah. Can't be truma because we're going to need it. Now, it'll take a little while till we get to how we know we need it. I'm going to start with this braita. Ditan toshav. Now we're going to define. Braita defines what is this toshav and sachir. Toshav zek kanoi kinyan olam. A toshav is an eved ivri who is there forever. That's why I mentioned about the eved ivri, the 6 years and the forever, right? Till yovel. So this toshav is a resident. That means he's an eved ivri who lives in your house for the long term. Sachir zek kanoi kinyan shanim. That's an eved ivri who was only sold to you for 6 years and doesn't stay. And what's the point? If you're an eved ivri, a Jewish slave in the house of a kohen, you don't get to eat truma. Why not? Because you're not a kid. He doesn't acquire you, right? Like a Canaanite slave could be acquired. A Jew is not acquired by the master. You sold yourself into slavery because you couldn't afford to pay back a loan or something. So you work for him, but you're not owned by him. So therefore you can't eat truma, right? It ends up not in your favor for this halacha. It's in your favor maybe for other things, but not for this halacha. So now, seems like you would need toshav and sachir. We want to prove you don't need them both, right? We need to tell you both. Well, now they say, yamer toshav al yamer sachir. You could have said one and not the other, right? We want to say in the end, you need them both, and nothing is free. But right now, we're going to say maybe one is free because you could just say toshav and not sachir. If a toshav who's there forever can't eat truma, obviously a sachir who's only there for 6 years is not going to be able to eat truma, right? That would be logical, right? Vani omer, I would say, if you just had toshav and not sachir, what would I have said? If he lives forever and he doesn't eat truma, all the more so if he's only there for 6 years. So they say, well, not exactly, because ilu came. How do we know what toshav is and what sachir is? If you only had toshav, I might have thought what? I would have thought it's only talking about one type of eved ivri. Now, if I had to choose which one, who can't eat truma, I would assume the one who's there for 6 years. So I would have messed up my definition of toshav if I only had toshav. And I would thought, what would I think? I would think, kanoi kinyan shanim, only there for 6 years, can't eat truma. But aval kanoi kinyan olam would be able to eat. But if he's there forever, he would. That's why bas sachir really made al toshav. So the word sachir appearing teaches us the definition of toshav, right? If you only have one, you're not sure what it's relative to. Toshav is a resident. A resident could be an eved ivri who lives with you for 6 years. Once you have toshav and sachir, it's clear. Sachir is more temporary. Toshav is more permanent. So toshav will be the forever one, and the sachir will be the 6 year one. And then you realize that they're both included, right? And that's why you need it. So that is necessary for the verse, both those words. Aval b'Pesach mufne. Hi toshav v'sachir the katav Rabbanit Pesach ma'inihu. So why is it unnecessary? First of all, what kind of toshav and sachir are we talking about? What does it say there? We're going to have a big problem here. Toshav and sachir we just defined as eved ivri, Jewish slave, right? 6 years or forever, it doesn't matter. Jewish slave. Jewish slave, according to the Torah now, if we're going to plug in the definition for toshav and sachir, it says, lo yochal bo, can't eat the korban Pesach. What, because you became an eved ivri, you can't eat the korban Pesach? Of course not, you're a Jew. All Jews are commanded. Just because you're an eved doesn't mean you can't eat the korban Pesach. So that's what the Gemara is going to say. Hi, toshav sachir. What is it? Inema. If we're going to say it's toshav sachir mamash, the way we just defined them, mishum dahavale toshav sachir ipato lemi Pesach. They're going to be exempt from korban Pesach, and not only that, but forbidden to eat. Truma below achil. There's no way you could say that they can't eat the korban Pesach. Because why? What did we just define by truma? That turning out amabet, that they're not kanoi, they're not acquired by the master. Therefore, amalo kanele rabbe, right? They can't eat truma because they're not part of his household of things he acquired. And therefore, right, they're not acquired. Hachanami lo kanele rabbe, if they lo kanele rabbe, then they're not part of his property. Then, of course, they're just a regular Jew who happens to just work in someone's house, which means, of course, they're obligated, which means toshav and sachir could not be coming to tell you that a toshav and sachir, an eved ivri, doesn't eat korban Pesach, which means that the Pesach is unnecessary. Now, you have an obvious problem here that the Rishonim will ask, which is, wait a minute, then how could it be referring to eved ivri? In other words, eved ivri does eat. So forget about it being unnecessary. It's contrary to halacha. So what they say is it must be then that toshav and sachir actually mean non-Jewish slaves. If it means non-Jewish slaves, you have a problem, right? Like a non-Jewish, maybe it could mean something else, like a non-Jewish resident, someone who lives in your community who's not Jewish. They can't eat the korban Pesach. But once you do that, you say toshav and sachir doesn't mean what we think it means something else. But even that is unnecessary because it already says kol ben nechar lo yochal bo, which means anyone who's not part of your community, right, whether we're a Jew who left or a Gentile to begin with, can't eat the korban Pesach. So again, it's going to be unnecessary. And therefore, we can learn from it. Okay, that's the one that's panui. So now they said, okay, elalafnuye. So that's how we know it's unnecessary. In the verse, we can use it to darshan this arel. Okay, again, what will we do? Toshav and sachir appear there. Toshav and sachir appear by truma, Pesach truma. Let's learn that arel, just like their arel can't eat, also in truma arel can't eat. But akate mufne mitzad achadu. This is, I told you we were going to get to this. But it's only free on one side, right? Only the Pesach one is free. The truma one is needed. We already know that Rabbi Elazar holds that when it comes to Gzera Shava, that's free only on one side and not on both sides. You can learn, but you can also ask a question. If you have a good question, you can knock it out. So we're going to have to try to prove that both are unnecessary. We can't do that because we already showed we can't do that. So they say, well, we are doing Gzera Shava of toshav sachir, which is 2 words, from toshav sachir, which is 2 words. Now, the 2 in truma, we have to basically get rid of, but we're still left with 2, toshav and sachir. So they come and say something kind of creative. Kevan de legufe lo tzarich, since we don't need them for their own sake, shtei chad alamed, ushtei chad amilamed. Shtei means throw, chad is 1. On the lamed, 1 we're going to take and kind of say, throw it over to truma, which is the one we're trying to derive from the other one, and keep 1 in its place for Pesach. And you're going to end up saying there's 2 words that are unnecessary. Throw 1 to truma, keep 1 in Pesach, and we're going to basically then learn from one to the other. And that's how we do it. It's a little bit of a, it's kind of a kvetch, as we say, but, theoretically, we've gotten to somehow where we could say it's mufne on 2 parts. Now we're going to start a whole slew of questions, which are going to be the same questions we're going to ask of Rabbi Akiva, or some of them anyway. Ima Pesach onein asur bo. Wait a minute. Once we have Gzera Shava, we're going to learn all sorts of things from Pesach to Truman. We don't do that. So, like, for example, if you're an olim, someone died and you're waiting for the burial, one of your close relatives, onein asur bo, can't eat korban Pesach. So, af truma, onein asur bo. Maybe we should say the same thing for truma. Maybe by truma, in onein is forbidden. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, we know that an onen is allowed to eat truma. Okay, we learned that before. So we're going to learn it from this pasuk. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina Omer, v'chol zal, any stranger can't eat truma, which comes to say, zarut amarti l'chavalo aninu, it has to be a stranger, not someone who's a kohen who's just in a state of aninut, before burial. No, they can eat truma then even as well from the zar. So then they say, wait a minute. If you're going to say zar is only a non-kohen and a kohen who has an issue like aninut can eat truma, well, for the same price, you can say ema velo arelut. You could say maybe it also means if he's not circumcised. What's the difference, right? In other words, if you're going to exclude someone who's not circumcised and include someone who's an olim, it seems a little bit random. So they say, well, arelut, haktiv, toshav, sachir, we have a drasha. But that doesn't help you. We could say that the drasha of toshav is sachir, which wasn't talking about arel, is coming to teach you onim, that onim is forbidden to eat truma. And kol zar is coming to say someone who's uncircumcised can't eat truma. And it's all random. So they say not so random. Arelut havaleli ribuye shekain, and there's like a thing for what do you call a siman, for symbol for what these next things are going to be, but we'll just read the items. Michusal ma'aseh. Okay, there's certain stringencies about arel. First of all, you're missing some action in order for something to happen, right? You're missing a circumcision, okay, as opposed to aninut, where it's not missing any action. I mean, it is a little bit the burial, but it's not really the same thing. Ma'aseh begufo, it's something in your body itself, okay, which is not true about onim, something external. Anush karet, you get karet for it. You don't get karet for onim. Yesh no lefnei adibor, it existed before Matan Torah. Avraham was commanded to circumcise. Umilat charav avadav ma'akevet. And if you don't deal with your family doing a brit milah, you can't eat the korban pesach either. Okay, you have to make sure if you have people in your house uncircumcised, you can't eat the korban pesach. So those are all chumrot about arelut. Okay, but they're not true about onim. So therefore, if we're going to include one and exclude the right, we're going to say this is forbidden in truma. We're going to take the one that's more strict. So the Gemara says, Adrabah, aninut havalei ribuy. This is a very common structure where they start listing. These have all these chumras and this. Oh, these have all these chumras, and then usually we say, well, those have more and those have less, and that's what we're going to do here. Aninut sheken yeshna b'chol sha'ah. It could happen over and over again. A rail happens once in your life. Fix it, you're done, right? But aninut could happen. You could have many relatives who die. It's applicable to men and women. And you can't fix it yourself. Whereas arel, you can fix yourself. Obviously not if you can't, but theoretically you can. So the answer, like I said before, hanach nefishan, this is a longer list. So there's more chumras by arel. That's why arel no, and onim yes, can eat truma. Rava adds another answer. Rava amar below hanach nefishan nami lo matzedam. Even without all that long list, we still couldn't say it. Why? Shavkinan arelut dichtiv begufei Pesach, yalfinan aninu mi Pesach. Pesach gufei mi maaser gamrina. We're going to learn, if we have a gzera shava, we're going to learn something that appears in the text. If you remember, when I read you those psukim, it never said anything about an onim. Where do we know that an onim can't eat the korban pesach? We actually learned it out from maaser. By maaser, when you make this declaration at the end, the year, whatever, I'm not going to go into all the details, but you make this declaration. I never ate ba'onim imenu. I never ate maaser when I was in onim. We're talking about maaser sheni. There you learn onim. From there, they learn back to Pesach. And then what? You want to learn from a drasha on a drasha, right? To learn to us? No, we're going to learn something that explicitly says it. If we have a gzera shava from Pesach, we're going to learn something explicitly in the text, which is the arel, and we're not going to learn onim, which was only learned out from a drasha in any case for Pesach. So now they say, okay, we still have more questions. Ima Pesach milat charav avadav ma'akevet. If already we're going to make this gzera shava. So first we tried to say, what about onim? Let's do another thing. Just like by Pesach, milat charav avadav ma'akevet. If you don't do everyone in your family, make sure they're all circumcised and all your slaves, your Canaanite slaves, you can't eat the korban. Av truma, maybe you'd say the same thing about truma. Milat charav avadav ma'akevet. Everyone in your household isn't circumcised, you can't yourself eat truma. So they say, Amar Kra, umalta oto az yochalbo. It says when you circumcise him, then you can eat it. Which sounds like, now what is the drasha? Bo. Then you can eat it, the korban pesach, meaning it's specifically only for this halacha and for nothing else. Milat charav avadav ma'akevet bo milachol b'pesach, but ein milat charav avadav ma'akevet b'truma. Bo seems to say only here. So they say, wait a minute, that's not a good drasha. Ihachi ema kol arelo yochal bo. Also by the Aral pasuk it says bo. If you're going to say bo is just here and nowhere else, well then you're going to have a problem with our whole drasha. Uncircumcised can't eat truma also, even though it says kol arelo yochal bo, which would sound like what you're saying, only here and not anywhere else. So they say, again, back to what we said before. Haktiv, toshav, sachir, we have a gzera shava to override that, to which they're going to say again, umara ita, right? The gzera shava can either override you who are circumcised, Or it could override that maybe you need your sons to be circumcised as well to eat truma. So which one? So they say very obviously, Mistabra arelut gufe havele rabuye sheken. Well, first it's a little less obvious, but you would have maybe come up with this yourself. Sheken maseh begufo. It's more strict your own circumcision because it's yours, your body, and as opposed to other people's. And anush karet, and you get karet for it. Okay, but they say, what are you talking about? It's something that you'll do multiple times. You have more children, you buy more slaves, right? It's a mitzvah you do many times. That might make it more stringent. And then again, that should be the one we learn to truman, not the other. So they say hanach nefisha. Okay, the more chumras by that one, right? 2 versus 1. But now they have the more logical answer. Even if you didn't have that, you still wouldn't be able to say it. Why? It's counterintuitive. You're going to say, arelut gufe lo ma'akabe. You're going to say, truma can be eaten by an uncircumcised person, but you can't eat it if you didn't circumcise all your family. That makes no sense, right? If you yourself can be uncircumcised and eat it, then arelut achrine ma'akabe, then the fact that you didn't circumcise your children is going to prevent you from doing it. So that can't be. Therefore, if we're going to choose one and not the other, it's going to be that we're going to learn the arel and we're not going to learn the other one. And that's because we use this bow to say bow and not anywhere else. And even though it said bow in the arel pasuk, we said, no, we have the drasha of Zera Shavah to override. Okay, we're going to start with another question on another bow that once you say bow, what about this pasuk? And we'll continue on and then we'll get to Rabbi Akiva and go through part of what we did today will be a repeat of, will be repeated in tomorrow's class. Have a great day, everyone.